Maybe.
Good to see you. Glad that you're in here today. We're late getting started. Preacher, he got much sense, I guess. He just keeps going and going. Slows us up. So, we will continue our study on empowering words of Jesus. And you can see there on the top of your handout that we experience grief and loss. So we will be covering grief, as in the grieving the loss of a person, of friends or family or whatever, and loss that's associated with that. But grief also takes other forms. You know, you get fired from your job, grief, or if you retire from your job, there might be some grief associated with that.
Not much.
Some people, you know, and it's even like that with the loss or the death of a loved one. Sometimes there's not much grief. As far as people were happy the old coot's dead. But grief.
My mother said she was ready to go, and the three of us better not do anything to mess that up.
Y'all were happy for her to go, but in another,
Miss her, but
another thought process there. But there is, I had mentioned this before. Before I would deploy in the military, Iraq or Afghanistan or even other, I went to Korea, Turkey for a year each time. Rhonda and I had some of the most difficult times of our married life. And it wasn't until I really understood what it was. I mean, we would get into silly arguments before I left, or we didn't want to be around each other. And until I learned about anticipatory grief, which is, especially going to a war zone, it's easier to say goodbye to somebody that you're mad at than somebody that you're madly in love with. And so it was easy for us to do that. And going to a war zone, it's always a question, well, is he coming back? So it's anticipatory grief. So today we're going to look at this lesson about grief and loss. I think almost all of us have had to endure loss of a loved one or a close friend, some even very recently. And so this can have some emotional things to it. So be aware of that. Also, I throw my invitation out there. If there's things that you ever want to talk to me about, that's okay. We can sit down and talk. I have some training dealing with loss, grief, death, dying. I was just looking at these 3 quick books I found in my library by David Schweitzer, The Dynamics of Grief. Its source, its pain, its healing. Then a book here, Living with Grief After Sudden Loss, Suicide, Homicide, Accident, Heart Attack, Stroke. And then also Dealing with Death and Dying. This one's kind of interesting in our, we have a sack full of nurses in here. This is actually a nursing skill book. And it's, the foreword is by Kubler-Ross. First name? Kubler-Ross. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You might say, well, who is that? Because you're all looking at me like, who is that? She came up, basically put into form the stages of grief, is what she basically did. But like I said, this is a nursing skill book I have in my library as well. But grief happens, takes many forms, different. We're all different. We grieve differently. Culturally, we grieve differently. When I did work in a hospital, Wilford Hall Medical Center, as a chaplain, whenever we were getting called down to the emergency department that someone was dying, going to die, or had died, this might sound crazy to you. Don't judge me, okay? Don't judge me, because judging's wrong in this instance, and you'll be lying and going to hell, and I don't want you to, so don't judge me. But we chaplains, there were 6 of us, we took rotations in the hospital and all. We would ask, before we went, to be a little prepared, because we're going into a place, we don't know these people. And you have to understand, Wilford Hall Medical Center is a United States Air Force hospital, or at least it was. They combined it with the Brooke Army Medical Center out in San Antonio several years ago. But it was the largest Air Force hospital that we had. And it wasn't just for the military, because you've got trauma surgeons and all there who deploy. When they deploy, we're dealing with trauma in a war zone. You want to prepare. So it was a level 1 hospital. So they would take emergencies, trauma, level 1 trauma type stuff that happened in the city of San Antonio. So even though it was a military installation, military hospital, somebody could have a terrible motorcycle crash and be life-flighted to Wilford Hall Medical Center. So we didn't always have that, just military people. Oftentimes, people we were dealing with were others from the community. So when I say we grieve differently, and even culturally, we would ask, before we went down, we got the call, what culture do they come from? Are they white? Are they Hispanic? Are they black? Why would we ask that? Well, part of it was just to prepare ourselves on the way. Because overall, we white folks are more stoic in our grieving. Overall, not everyone. Hispanics are more demonstrative. Our black friends and family, more demonstrative. Is any of them right or wrong? No, it's not about that. It's a cultural thing, I think. And we would prepare ourselves as we went down. Usually we get down there, family didn't know, one chaplain there, doctor would come in, and I'd be in there with the family in this room. They did not know their loved one had died. The doctor would come in, and he'd say, well, and ask about medications the person was on, or this, that, and the other. And, well, we did this, this, and this, and la, 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 la. And he'd go in and speak fast, and he would say, and he had injuries that were not consistent with life. Do you have any questions? Okay, bye. Literally, he would leave. And they would look at me, shocked, no matter what the culture was. If it was Hispanic or African American, sometimes, especially Hispanic, in that instance, would be wailing. And literally, I've had them there in the hallways, rolling on the floor where a loved one had died. Doctor got out of there. Clowns.
Yeah, but the best way to do that is prepare. Go in and talk to them. He's not doing well. I'll come back and give you an update. He's already died, but I'll come back and give you an update. So they're ready. You come back and give them that message. Then they're listening. But you're right. The doctor did do what you did.
The chaplain never gives the message that somebody's died.
Yeah.
Typically. When we would go out on next of kin notifications when somebody had died in war, the chaplain is not there to give the notification. The chaplain is there for spiritual comfort. And in that case, the doctor would come in, tell them they died, and leave, and often use terms they wouldn't understand. They expired at 3:45. Any questions? Died. They had injuries inconsistent with life. They had injuries inconsistent with life. They died, man. Tell them they died. Leave it to me. What does that mean, chaplain? Yeah, I got some energy behind that, can you tell?
That was not your favorite thing to do.
No, it was difficult. As a chaplain, and working in a hospital, and all the trauma I saw in the hospital in Iraq, I gasp every time I go into a medical facility to this day. It's almost a PTSD thing.
It is a PTSD. Just admit it. It is.
Yeah, it probably is. It's difficult to this day because of all the dismemberment, the trauma, the everything.
Suddenness as well.
Yeah. So anyway, so we're going to go through this today, and if you need to talk later, always you have my number. You can always get with me. So here's a question: what is it that makes the experience so painful when we suffer the loss of a loved one or close friend? What makes that so painful? Love them?
Just the fact you're not going to see them.
Yeah.
The separation that you know that is coming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It can be just painful. And what is it about our modern culture that makes grieving so difficult and so hard?
We don't talk about
We don't
it.
talk
We
about
avoid
it.
it.
We're going to talk about that, what you're talking about, that we don't talk about it here in a second.
And then people think they know how long your grieving period should be.
Did you look at my notes?
No.
Okay.
They do.
You're just smart.
They think they know how long you should grieve and how much you should grieve. And yes, now why people think that they need to help you in that area, I don't know.
Judging and assumptions.
We do grieve in different ways. Like I said, it can be just personal, it can be cultural, it can be geographical. We've lived in different places in the United States and out west. Even the white folks out there, I was used to white folks down south. You get white folks out there, even they do some things differently in their grieving process. Not right or wrong. Yes, ma'am.
The person that can tell you how to do that is the person that has never done it.
I agree. Bill J said, the person that can tell you how to grieve is a person who's never grieved. And oftentimes that is correct. Yes.
I think, speaking for myself, we can always prepare for things, the unexpected. You know, lose a job, have to move, whatever. But you don't practice for losing someone. But you don't sit around and think what you're going to do if she dies. And it's always such a shock.
Our son Andrew lives in Colorado, outside of Denver with his wife. They were putting together their last will and all this types of stuff, and felt like they needed to do that. Now, Andrew is 29, and his wife is just a little older than him. They're putting it together. And they sent me a text, Dad, will you be the executor of our will? You know, I was like, son, I hope that never happens, but yeah, I'll help you out. Okay, well, you and Mom take our 2 dogs.
That's the line.
Well, yeah, but I really don't like talking about this. So I wrote him and his sweet wife, Sarah, a long note back, said, look, guys, I love you. No, it more or less, y'all doing okay? You're not planning on checking out anytime soon, are you? Yeah. That would, yeah, so.
Did they have an alternate?
For,
Well, I mean, if you want donuts, you might need an alternate.
An alternate executor.
that's true, I mean, or I could be leaning back in a chair and fall and crack my head. So, let's get into this, because I'm on page 1. We're supposed to end at 11:15. Here we go. Death and loss are universal experiences. For all of humankind is terminal. Bible encourages us to realize our time on earth is temporary. We see in Psalm 39:4, show me, O Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting is my life. Grief and loss come to everyone, inevitable. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 4. There is a time to be born and a time to die, a time to laugh and a time to weep. This isn't strange to us. We know about it. Death is as much a part of life as is birth. Even though we know death comes to every human being, when we lose those we love, the feelings of sadness and emptiness can be overwhelming. They can be devastating. Whether it was anticipated or comes unexpectedly, like a bolt from the blue, the experience of grief and loss is painful. Even experiencing painful grief, Jesus does speak empowering words. So, the pain of grief, the loss of a loved one can cause us to lose our emotional and spiritual equilibrium. All of life seems to be out of focus. It's a painful struggle just to make it through another day. You know, when you experience a loss that's very close to you, it can be so painful that you wonder how the world could even keep going on when you're stuck right here. We lose our appetite, have difficulty concentrating, and we labor to accomplish the most mundane tasks. Life continues all around us. One thing we seem to experience is the pain of loss. So I was called when I was at the hospital out there. I was in a one-year program, I told you all before, called Clinical Pastoral Education the Air Force sent me to. And it was dealing with death and loss and all like that. And they were preparing us to deploy to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I got called up. There was a guy there at the bedside of his wife. She was dying. And so I was there. They were both in their 80s. And we're there as she slowly passed from this life. And they pronounced her deceased. And we talked, and he was just telling me about all kind of good things and life with them. And they'd been married since they were like in their late teens. He had a military career, retired from the military. And here they were in their 80s, having celebrated, 65, 70 years of life together. And he, in typical white person fashion, he was stoic. I wasn't crying, no tears, just talking to me. And so after they let us be there for a while, the nurse came and said, well, we're going to take her down here in a few minutes. She said, she looked at her and little hands, said, would you like her rings? And he said, yeah. And he looked at me, he said, Chaplain, can you take the rings off her fingers? I said, yeah, I can do that. And so I took her little hand, and he was fine until I slipped her wedding ring. And he just broke down. You have to understand the imagery there. I'm sure for him, 65, 70 years prior to that, there was a minister who had them put rings on their fingers. And here, as she's lying there in her bed, I take the fingers, I take the rings off her fingers and hand them to him. Life continues around us while we go through the experiences, the pain of loss. Several common and inevitable reactions associated with grieving. There's shock, numbness. And you might ask yourself, how long does this last? I don't know. Read books on it. They don't know. Now, the grieving process, how long is it? Well, we don't know. Nobody knows. But if you're still in shock and numb from the loss of a loved one 2 years down the road, no, that's abnormal. I mean, there finally gets to a point where that's a little far. The numbness and shock is so profound for some, they have difficulty recalling events and circumstances that followed the death of one that they love. It may be shock, maybe a God-given anesthetic which helps us deal with the loss and accept the news. I wonder how much within us is actually from God to help us deal with those things at the beginning. Disbelief, denial, is a common early response. I've seen that going out on next-day notifications with the military when someone was killed. It's denial, disbelief. Now, y'all are lying. Y'all are lying to us. I think I mentioned before, there's only one time where we got kicked out of somebody's house. I mean, you can't stay. You know, you go out, you got the commander going to deliver the news, you got the chaplain there for spiritual support, you have a medical officer because you don't want to go in there and give the news. And I say medical officer, not just medical officer, but like a doctor or a nurse. You don't want to give the news, and they go into some kind of medical emergency. And usually you had a driver too, because you want to leave somebody in the car, because sometimes they've done things to the car. You got to understand, you don't know what you're walking into in these situations. The Marine Corps, early part of the Iraq War, gave next of kin notification that people went out back and went around, poured gasoline on the car and set it on fire. So you had somebody in the car to be there to hopefully maybe move it if they came out with gasoline jugs or whatever. But you have that denial. We don't want to believe that terrible thing has happened. Fear, dread, overwhelming pain in the present causes us to face the future, sometimes with fear and trepidation. We see pain and heartache in the coming days, in the coming weeks, the coming months. We become anxious and afraid, terrified of what the future holds, wondering if we'll be able to cope. I mean, how many of us actually sit down and want to think about the loss of your spouse even? I don't, Rhonda might think about those things. If she does, she doesn't talk to me about them. I don't talk to her about them. And we should make preparations. We talked about, well, after we passed, you want to be cremated. And she said, I want to be cremated. So I said, okay. I said, so I guess I'll have to be too, because I won't want to be there by myself in the grave.
You'll be
Somebody want me to dump you out in the bay, my boat. You know, what is, I got 1, 2, 3, 4 vases of ashes I'm supposed to take out and dump at some point in the bay. I don't get a ticket. You're supposed to go off so far into the Gulf and do that. But they pay me $800 each to take them out. I still don't know if I took them out yet. I'm lying to y'all. I'm so lying. Okay, let's move on. We got guilt.
Guilt.
Guilt right now.
Not much.
So, it's not unusual for those who grieve to sometimes wonder if they're responsible for it in some way or contributed to the loss. The phrase, if only, becomes a common expression in self-talk. If only we go to the doctor sooner. If only I'd recognize symptoms quicker. If only I made better choices in treatment. If only this and only that. And you can only yourself to death, drive yourself crazy, because you go through all these scenarios. Some feel guilty, believing they should have been a better companion or a better friend to the deceased. We reflect on what we could have done or should have done better. Some of you feel guilty before God and wonder if this loss is somehow His punishment for their sin. Do you see how much we can beat up on ourselves? Got anger. Anger and loss can be directed towards a lot of things. People be angry towards the one who died for leaving them. They can be angry at God for allowing it to happen. They can be angry at people who we think are responsible maybe for the loved one's death. Maybe they went to the hospital, the doctor couldn't save them, so it was the doctor's fault, or it was that nurse. The EMT.
Or that drunk driver.
So many different things. Then we have depression. When a person passes through denial and anger, comes to terms with the reality of loss, depression, despondency, oftentimes set in. Depression is often accompanied by feelings of hopelessness, despair, anxiety, overwhelming sadness. Could come in a variety of physical symptoms, loss of appetite, sleeplessness, headaches, backaches, nausea, feelings of exhaustion. You can take on the physical component there. Yeah. So all the symptoms described above are natural, normal to experiencing loss. Listen to that again. All of these are natural and normal. Natural and normal. You can be very normal going through all of these things. So, all of them, being normal, going through that great loss, being unnatural to suffer the death of a loved one, not feel the suffering of pain and grief. See, that's the opposite way. I've had that before too, where people don't really acknowledge it. If I don't acknowledge it, it didn't happen. Yeah. So here's the thing. What concerns me more when I'm dealing with a grieving family isn't the ones who are crying and upset, maybe wailing, maybe rolling in the halls. It's the ones who aren't doing anything. Who are making sure everybody has something to eat, taking care of them. You got a place to stay. Hey, we got this. We got to work with the bulletin. We got to do. Those who are not even acknowledging the loss are a greater concern to me than those who are getting it out. Those who refuse to grieve or deal with pain are going to live with a stress that's increasing. They're going to have a heartache that's going to remain unresolved. They don't grieve. In fact, if we fail to adequately and experientially grieve the loss of those we love, we may find ourselves displaying it in a lot of unhealthy symptoms, unresolved anger toward the loved one, God, or others that I mentioned, unsettled guilt exhibited in self-punishment, hyperactivity and busyness in an attempt to avoid mourning. If I just stay busy and keep working and doing this and that and the other, I don't have to mourn. And that works actually for a while. I'm not saying it doesn't. Shrine building. Avoiding memories and refusing to reflect on the life of the loved one. Dulled emotions that reveal an unwillingness to feel. Perpetual indecision and lethargy.
Lethargy.
Yeah.
Lethargy.
Lethargy?
That's
That's what I thought.
Right. It's lethargic, but it's lethargy.
Lethargy.
And it altered your relationships and estrangement from friends and family. All of those can happen there with unresolved griefs. I think that I was 6 or 7 when the first person that I was fairly close with, was a great uncle, had died. And I actually went to visitation. I'm not sure if I went to the actual funeral, but I went to visitation the night before the funeral with my dad. That was the first time I'd ever seen a dead person. The reason I bring this up is all of us do things different raising children, but I think it's a good idea in not hiding death from them. It's kind of like I was talking about this morning, don't solve all the problems for your children, teach them how to solve their own problems. One of the best things you can teach your child is how to make a good decision, how to solve problems. And death is one of those things that they're going to be around it at some point. Don't totally hide it. I mean, now don't gather them up saying we're going to every funeral in town this weekend to harden you up. I wouldn't do that. But we need to give ourselves and others permission to grieve and to mourn and allow adequate time for adjustment and resolution. Allow adequate time. What is that? Good luck. It all depends. So, here it is. Dealing with loss in contemporary society often becomes problematic because certain elements in the modern world make it difficult. We're a mobile, uprooted society. We make frequent moves and relocations. I think people move nowadays more than what they used to. It makes it difficult to form those personal relationships that offer real support in grieving. Pressure to heal quickly. Well, you ought to get over it. I mean, it's been 3 weeks. Come on. Yeah. Get over it. We're often uncomfortable around those who are grieving and insist that they heal fast so we can get on with our lives. Being around grieving people is not comfortable. I've done it a lot, and it doesn't get easier. I love people. I don't mind being around grieving people. It takes energy. And I'll be the first to tell you, after I've spent a good amount of time dealing with grief and being around grieving people, I have to take a nap. I mean, I'm worn out, emotionally spent. An inability to express emotion. Many grow up in an environment which the display of deep emotion is unacceptable. Speaking to you white folks, we oftentimes don't do that. It's not acceptable. We tend to be very stoic people. Even in times of major heartache and pain, they're encouraged to keep their feelings to themselves. Here's one I kind of mentioned, being sheltered from death. We shelter ourselves, our children, from the reality of death. This allows us to live undisturbed and postpone reflecting on our own demise. When we turn away from death, we abdicate our responsibility to the dying and often fail to show compassion and support for those who need us. I'll tell you right here and now, I believe, and you can disagree with me if you want to, but when a person dies, I believe a funeral or a memorial service of some type needs to be held. I think that there needs to be a time to come together and to grieve and comfort one another. And many times you hear at the deceased request, there will be no funeral or memorial service. Well, I tell the deceased to blow it out their ear. It ain't about them. A memorial service, a funeral's for the living. And if you thought, well, I don't want a memorial service or funeral service, I encourage you to rethink that. Because at that point, you're gone. Let your family decide. And if they don't want to do it, then that's on them. I encourage it because it's a time to share with one another and to talk about the person, but also your own lives. And that time to grieve, that time to cry, that time to hold on to each other. Don't do that to your families. Don't do that. Yes, Jim.
I was raised in the South in the 40s and 50s. The standard for young men were big boys don't cry.
Yeah.
And
I almost mentioned that because with us white folks, it's even worse for
Yeah.
boys because big boys don't cry.
that was drilled into us.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
There's something cathartic about the gathering around the funeral where you hash over old times, memories. I mean, machine that it has to occur at that time, or it takes that to bring it on. But there is a catharsis in getting together and talking about old times and memories.
It is. It can be very much healing. Yes, Mrs. Brotman?
COVID really disrupted that practice, and people now even, there's not always memorial or something, because they go, oh, well, people don't want to be together, or it's, and
It
it's
never
sad.
brought, it never brought closure.
Yeah. John had a cousin who there never was a memorial, because it was during COVID, and said, oh, well, we'll do this later, but it just never happened.
There was a member of the VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, who had died, and they were having a memorial service. They needed chaplains. I was stationed in Tucson, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, and we took rotation on doing funerals, because we still did funerals for veterans and retirees and all. And so I was up next, so I said, well, I would do it. They were having it at the VFW, and they did. They all got together, and I, at that point, said I'd never do that again. And they were so drunk. It was like, here I'm doing this memorial service. You know, I believe we should get together and memorialize someone and talk about them and be together. But I'm not, they were so drunk. It was crazy. I had to pull my gun out to get out of the place. Just kidding on that. But at least it's something. Where are we?
Number 5.
Okay. Disconnected families. Family members who are not relationally close to one another don't know how to support each other in grief. If we don't offer support to one another in life, how are we possibly going to be equipped to demonstrate it in death? Yeah. I'll be first to admit, my mother was an only child. My dad had 2 brothers and a sister. One of the brothers died at birth. But the others, so I had cousins and all on that side. Do you know the only time I see those folks is at funerals? That is it. That is it. Maybe some of you can relate to that experience too. Then there's the absence of faith. As our culture becomes more and more secular, we're not only turning away from faith, but discarding important rituals and symbols that accompany the faith experience. When the church becomes peripheral in the experience of death, faith is silent and grief recovery is going to be difficult. Faith equips us to grieve, and Jesus truly empowers us with his words. I've been around atheists before when someone dies. I don't know, it just seems so sad. Another funeral, so we allowed people to use our chapel for a funeral, and the guy was an atheist. And they got there, and they said, well, chapel, what do we do? I wasn't having any part of it, because he wasn't a believer. And so finally, out of mercy, I said, well, let me see what I can do. Because you get ready for a funeral, you cut out any Christian songs, you cut out prayers, you cut out anything about the Bible, you cut out, I mean, it was short. It was short. I opened up, and thanks for being here for Sergeant Bubba, and he's dead. Anybody got anything to say?
Like Rover.
I was a little more diplomatic than that, but it was, what? Just like Rover, he's dead all over?
You still have to remember that any kind of memorial is for the living, not the dead.
In this case, I didn't even know the guy. So I said, anybody have anything to say? Nobody had anything to say. I gave him a lot of time. And then finally, a guy raised his hand. He got up and said a few words. I mean, I didn't know anything about the person. And it was, yeah, total absence of faith. Some of these situations I've been in. So we have empowering words. John 11:25-26 on the resurrection of life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. And he spoke those words in the context of passing of Lazarus, right? Passing of Lazarus. He knew he was ill, and nonetheless, he delayed his journey to Bethany. He alluded that Lazarus' sickness is going to lead to glory for God. They arrive there, and Lazarus is dead. Death of her brother is especially difficult for Martha. And Martha's probably a little angry at Jesus because, well, if you'd have been here, if you would have been here, this wouldn't happen. That's what she said. Chapter 11, 21. In response, Jesus tells Martha, well, he's going to rise again. Oh, I know, later on, the last days. Yeah. And he responds to her grief with a statement about himself and resurrection. You see right there. Yeah. For the unbeliever, death can be seen and thought of as the end, but it's not so far as one who believes in Jesus. Such a person may die and he passes through the door of what we call physical death. Jesus and Apostle Paul use the term falling asleep. Death for him is but the gateway for further life and fellowship with God. This message from Jesus transcends the Pharisaic view of a remote resurrection at the end time, empowered Martha with reason to mourn. I've often wondered what we know when we die. When you're born, you don't remember your birth. We don't. Why don't we remember that? Let me tell you what Gary thinks. I think that God doesn't want us to remember that. That's just Gary's thoughts. Gary goes one step further and saying, I wonder if our death, as traumatizing what it might be, of what we'll know or happen or anything else like that, or if God will dull that for us. I don't know. Those are just Gary's wild philosophical thoughts on that. But I would imagine remembering our births would give us all PTSD. We'd all be in support groups for, yeah, well, my birth was, wow, it was like this. I weighed 12 and a half pounds. Anyway.
I think your mother being
Our oldest son was, 12 or 11.5. He was 11.5. Jim, you have a thought?
Just follow up on what you were saying about when you die. There's studies that believe now that when your heart stops, your brain is still working for 3 to 5 minutes after your heart quits.
From one who's blacked out number of times, nope.
Okay.
You don't remember anything.
No, you don't.
Just to black it out.
Yeah.
Sherry?
I took inadvertently wandered into the wrong classroom one time, and I ended up taking the martyrdom class. And it was, yeah.
Inadvertently walked into a class.
It was
And
a
for
martyrdom
martyrdom.
class, but I stayed because that's cool, But anyway, but one of the things,
You killed me, Sherry. I'm sorry. Go ahead, speak
I'll
up.
take it as a compliment. So anyway, in the martyrdom class, one of the things that was taught was that, okay, first of all, remember, you're a believer, you're with Jesus. When it's over, you're going to be in heaven. You're going to be with the Lord, so it's all good. But they said that the minute, like, they used the example of being lit on fire, like being on fire and being burned to death. That no matter how bad it is, when it's done, you're going to be on the other side, and you're going to look back and go, well, that wasn't so bad, now I'm in heaven. So, I don't know if you're going to remember your death, but in martyrdom class, they taught you that, well, you'll be all right, because you're going to be in heaven. It'll be okay once you're done with it.
Yeah. Okay, Dave?
I think as far as God doing things for us, like our brain is not fully developed until our 20s, and that's part of the reason I believe we don't remember things like our birth and maybe some other things that might have been traumatizing. But another thing that I feel strongly about is kids growing up. The process of growing would be very painful unless those kids who have energy are jumping and bouncing and crawling and just look at a kid go. If they sat still like an adult does, the process of growing, I imagine, would be painful. You know, when we're healing, think about it. We're healing, we're growing new bone, or it hurts. But as a child, they move and jump and move. I just think there's a lot of things like that God does in our lives.
I think it's more of a time and space to me. But
Well, I was avoiding that this time.
okay, we got to get through this real fast. So you will grieve, but you grieve for turning joy. John 16. He's continuing to prepare his disciples for his departure and equip them. He'll leave and return and all. I'll let you read that. Let me go ahead and finish up for today on Jesus' words here. Jesus speaks when we experience grief and loss. And basically, he's kind of paraphrased here. This is not straight quotes out of the Bible. Those you love who have died or not experiencing true life is beyond your imagination. Why shouldn't we be happy with those who have died in the Lord and gone home? And, you know, there's all kind of thoughts on that. I just had a friend of mine I graduated high school with, lost her husband 2 days ago, and he passed away. And the interesting things put on there, like, we'll fly high with the angels and oversee us and watch over us and all. And there's not a biblical context for that whatsoever, nor would I believe that. Because Gary's thoughts, only Gary's thoughts, I wouldn't want my loved ones to look down here and be disappointed in us or be hurt by us. And I don't think that there's hurt and pain in heaven, nor do I think we put on angel wings and are flying around and are able to interact with people to a certain degree on that. Because there's a lot that I don't know, and please allow me to change my mind if you ever hear me talk about this again. But as far as people saying, watch over us, well, I don't want my deceased, whoever it is, to be watching over me. Jesus, please watch over me. Gary's thoughts. So you'll experience that same life with them someday in a great reunion. And what a great reunion it will be. The grief you experience now is only temporary, and you will surely share in a joy that will never disappear. So as hard and difficult as life is on this earth, we have a loving God, full of grace, full of mercy, full of grace, full of mercy, that we worship and we love. And he can help get us through whatever grief that we have. But we have heaven to look forward to one day. And I'll be so glad to be there, and I'll see David, and I'll say, see, David, I told you what you were thinking wasn't right. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But it'll be so great for that reunion one day. Anyway, that is all I have. Any thoughts?
No, but I have an announcement.
Okay. So she's got an announcement as soon as I'm done. So any questions, any thoughts? Before we go to Jennifer. Jennifer, you are on. You'll do mine.
Jilda has requested if the guys can help us pull the leaves up on the table and move them over here for movie night before y'all go.
Yeah, be back for movie night at 4:45.
Because it's a really, really good movie, y'all don't want to miss it.
Yeah, that too.
I can't
All right,
even.
y'all have a great week.